Before their 4-year-old son's body was tragically found in a river with shackled wrists and feet, the Villemin family had been suffering various forms of dread. The family had endured years of unsettling harassment in the form of threatening letters and phone calls. They would sometimes get up to 27 calls in a single day from an unknown individual who seemed to be resentful and unceasingly conversant with the family's innermost secrets. Was this mysterious caller, known only as the Raven, seeking revenge for the unfortunate murder of little Gregory? Or was the offender someone who knew the family better? France has been engulfed in mystery for almost 30 years, and the case has lately gained international interest thanks to a Netflix documentary called Who Killed Little Gregory? This intricate story weaves together long-lasting family feuds, retaliation, and shadowy characters that manipulate events behind the scenes, including late-night taunting. And this was all prior to Gregory being missing. The Raven was especially interested in Jean-Marie Villemin's accomplishments as a local plant foreman. Nevertheless, he tormented every member of his family. Uncles, aunts, cousins, and daughters-in-law were among those who occasionally received calls. The Raven even called Jean-Marie Little Boss, a disparaging moniker. The Villemins, on the other hand, found no entertainment in the Raven. Not only were the upsetting calls terrifying, but there were threats of physical harm involved. The caller's close understanding of the family's secrets added to their uncomfortable nature. He was skilled at inciting conflict between family members and appeared to enjoy doing it. The notion that the calls were coming from members of the familial circle did nothing except fan the flames. The Villemins came to the conclusion that the Raven was one of them because of his extensive knowledge of the extended family. Jean-Marie got a call one day while he was at work. The familiar, deep voice of the Raven threatened his home, perhaps hoping to set off a chain reaction. But Jean-Marie bravely resisted being lured and held his ground. He said to the mysterious speaker, "Go ahead, you can even burn it down," with composure. "I'll just build another one," he said, quoting the Raven, "then your wife is going to get hurt." He then went on to describe a new strategy he had come up with that was aimed at sexually assaulting Christine, Jean-Marie's wife. He continued, "Lucky for her, she didn't go out of the house again." Jean-Marie was undoubtedly angry and nervous during these exchanges, but he was able to keep his cool and remain composed, if only momentarily. After all, each person has a threshold. This border is always associated with their children for many. During another phone call, the Raven softly cautioned, "I can see him with my binoculars." There was a hint of worry about Jean-Marie's young son, Gregory. "Don't let him hang outside too much, or one day you will find him dead down there." The overwhelming fear was too much for Jean-Marie to handle. He reacted in anger, threatening to end the Raven's life if he dared to harm his son. His reaction, while understandable, was notably reckless. It was clear that the Raven had successfully hit a vulnerable spot, and he was well aware of it. In March 1983, an unsettling letter arrived. Written in solid, blocky letters, it stated, "The Lamond family, I will murder you. If you don't comply, I will make good on the threat I made to the boss about him and his little family. It's your choice." The chilling phrase, "life or death," concluded the message. In May 1983, the family's faceless tormentor ceased his unsettling activities for roughly 18 months. They breathed a sigh of relief, believing their ordeal was over. Sadly, they couldn't have been more mistaken. The worst was still lurking in the shadows. To the dread of Gregory's parents, the menacing promises of the Raven soon took a chilling turn into reality, forever altering the course of their lives. On October 16, 1984, Christine Villemin was engrossed in her daily chores as her 4-year-old son, Gregory, played merrily in the yard. They resided in a serene, secluded village called Lapangis-sur-Vallon, nestled alongside the Vallon River in France. It was an unlikely setting for a child to mysteriously disappear. Despite the past threats from the Raven, the year-long silence eased their fears, allowing their son some freedom to play outside. However, around 5:30 p.m., the family's tranquility was shattered. Gregory's uncle relayed a chilling message that Gregory had been discarded into the Vallon River. The police embarked on an exhaustive search, finally locating the poor child in the river around 9 p.m. that night. His small arms and legs were cruelly bound with a rope, forming a loop around his neck. He was still adorned in the warm winter hat his mother had lovingly given him, now obscuring his entire face. The investigators were astounded by little Gregory's serene expression after removing the hat. No signs of trauma or violence marred his body. His clothes were intact without any indications of struggle. Aside from the ropes binding him and his complexion being paler than usual, there were no other visible signs indicating his heart-wrenching demise. The news of Gregory's tragic end left France in shock. The media descended like a swarm of bees on the grieving parents, broadcasting their sorrow for the nation to witness. The collective heart of the nation ached, yearning for answers and justice for the innocent toddler. The relentless glare of television cameras and glossy magazines made Gregory's funeral a scene of profound grief and mourning. Amid the outpouring of grief, suspicions lingered. Could the Raven have been amidst the sea of mourners, basking in the aftermath of his horrifying act? After all, assuming he was the perpetrator, it wouldn't be far-fetched to imagine him wanting to witness the repercussions of his vengeful deed. The day following Gregory's tragic demise, the Raven taunted the Villemin family with one more chilling message, almost seeming to revel in the sorrow of the family's loss. The words, "I have taken vengeance," were disturbingly apparent, suggesting that the perpetrator might have been around all along, silently reveling in the family's grief and despair. It's a gut-wrenching thought, isn't it? Naturally, this is all based on the assumption that the Raven is indeed the architect of Gregory's untimely end. But is that the case? Jean-Marie believed so and had a strong hunch about the Raven's true identity. The police, however, had their doubts. During their thorough investigation, the authorities unearthed that the Villemin family had been tormented by not one but two anonymous callers, a man and a woman. This led them to the plausible conclusion that the horrific murder of Gregory and the relentless harassment suffered by the family were likely the handiwork of more than one person. Two witnesses had similar descriptions of an unusually dark-haired stranger. Police sketches based on their accounts revealed an uncanny resemblance to Jean-Marie's cousin, Bernard Laroche. The plot thickened as Bernard's handwriting bore a striking similarity to the script on the anonymous hate notes left for the Villemins. However, these were not the only suspicious factors surrounding Bernard. His alibi held for most of the day of the murder, but there was an unexplained gap of 30 to 45 minutes. Furthermore, he resided in Amans, an area the police suspected to be the Raven's lair. He also had frequent interactions with the uncle who received the anonymous call on the fateful day Gregory was found in the river. All these led to Bernard being under the detective's lens, making the whole story even more intriguing. The air was thick with suspicion, and Bernard's peculiar behavior only added fuel to the fire. In the engrossing Netflix miniseries, a journalist reminisces about Bernard's peculiar indifference when discussing the sensitive topic of a deceased child. With a bit of gentle nudging, Bernard's impassive demeanor quickly transformed into a tirade of fury. In his distress, he revealed his feelings of alienation by the Villemin family, insisting they should pay for their wrongs, all the while punctuating his fervor with an emphatic slam on the kitchen table. Though the meaning behind his heated words was unclear, the implications were far from heartwarming. Intriguingly, law enforcement also reported Bernard's atypical reactions. His obliviousness towards the detectives present and his seeming disregard for the seriousness of the situation raised eyebrows. Their search for answers following the tragic death of a young boy was met with an unexpected lack of urgency from Bernard. This prompted one to wonder, was there a reason for his unusual demeanor? And if so, how ominous could this reason be? Digging deeper revealed a complex past between the Villemin and Laroche clans. Once upon a time, they had been inseparable, with Jean-Marie and Bernard sharing a bond akin to brothers. However, Jean-Marie's marriage to Christine marked the beginning of a rift. As the cousins matured into adulthood, Jean-Marie's success set him apart, sparking a simmering resentment in Bernard. To add to this, Bernard harbored a distinct distaste for Christine, whose perceived arrogance only fanned the flames of his smoldering ire. Had this resentment finally reached a boiling point within Bernard? Was his rage potent enough to harm an innocent child? In a shocking turn of events, Bernard's 15-year-old sister-in-law, Muriel Bull, informed the police that the answer was yes, even claiming she had witnessed the dreadful act. The plot thickened when detectives observed discrepancies in Muriel and Bernard's accounts of his whereabouts on that fateful October day, particularly around the time of the murder. According to Bernard, he had reached his aunt's house around 5:30 p.m., with Muriel already present. However, Muriel's narrative painted a starkly different picture. After school one day, she made her way to her aunt's home, surprised to find Bernard had arrived before her. Yet her journey home raised eyebrows. When detectives attempted to piece together her journey, they discovered some discrepancies. The bus driver she mentioned wasn't on duty that day, and two classmates confirmed that Muriel wasn't on the bus either. Instead, she had hopped into a car. But whose car was it? And why would she concoct such a tale? The police were eager to find answers. Under intense questioning, Muriel's story began to unravel. The truth spilled out. She was actually picked up from school that day by Bernard Laroche. Her story took an even more intriguing turn as she described joining her brother-in-law and his son, Sebastian, on a journey to a mysterious town. Once there, Bernard exited the car and sauntered towards a house with a distinctive red roof. When he returned, he had a young boy with him. They then drove to another town, where Bernard exited the car with the boy, returning later without him. On November 5, 1984, in a flurry of camera flashes, Bernard was arrested for the murder of Gregory Villemin. Not long after, Muriel recanted her story in a televised statement that shocked the nation. She hinted that the police had bullied her into making the accusations, eager to find a scapegoat. She alleged that the officers had intimidated her during the questioning, threatening her with a reformatory, which frightened her into agreeing with their narrative. She then proclaimed her brother-in-law innocent, completely refuting her previous story. However, in a Netflix documentary, an investigator who interviewed Muriel asserted that he emphasized the importance of honesty during the interview and offered her several chances to change or retract her statement. Yet she insisted on her original account, fully aware of the serious implications of her words. It's quite a puzzle, isn't it? A young girl recants her statement days later, leaving us unsure about the true events or the accuracy of her testimony, if it holds any water at all. With the media storm swirling around this case, the tragic loss of a life, and the horrifying nature of the crime, you can't blame the police for being a bit too proactive. They might have been too quick to extract a statement from a vulnerable young girl to back up their case. Could she have been telling the truth and later felt pressured or threatened to retract it? Or was she weaving a web of lies all along? Was she crying out for attention amidst the family chaos, willing to falsely accuse an innocent man, only to realize her mistake under the glaring media spotlight? Or was fear driving her actions? Did she mislead the public on national television out of fear? Did her family have a hand in this? Rumors were rife that she was being forced into compliance. Was she under duress to retract her statement? It's all up for interpretation. And then there's the twist in the tale. The handwriting analysis linking Bernard to the crime was dismissed in court. With no substantial evidence, he walked free on February 4, 1985. Jean-Marie, seething with anger at the sight of the man he was convinced had murdered his son, vowed to avenge Gregory's death. And he meant it. But as he was plotting his revenge, the spotlight turned to another suspect, his wife, Christine. A handwriting expert claimed her handwriting matched the letters, suggesting her involvement in their son's death. Jean-Marie, however, remained skeptical. So much so that he made good on his promise. As Bernard Laroche left work on March 29th, just 4 days after Christine was named a suspect, Jean-Marie gunned him down. He was promptly arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for the murder. With credit for time served awaiting trial, he ended up serving about half his sentence. 2.5 years for murder. You might say the court empathized with his actions. Not that we're condoning his actions, of course. But you can sort of understand his motives, right? At the same time, Christine was entangled in her own legal troubles. for distinct women stepped up to claim that they had spotted her at the post office just before the murder occurred. If their statements were trustworthy, a point that's still up for discussion, it would imply that Christine had to be the one who dispatched the Raven's last letter, thus pointing to her as the cause of her own child's death. The situation worsened when a handwriting expert drew a connection between Christine's penmanship and that of the enigmatic stalker. In July of 1985, Christine was apprehended and charged with the crime. She responded by staging an 11-day hunger strike as a sign of protest. Eventually, she was released due to insufficient evidence and a lack of a convincing motive. However, the emotional strain had already caused significant damage. Following intense interrogations, she collapsed and tragically suffered a miscarriage, leading to the loss of one of her twins. By this time, the police had apprehended and subsequently released a total of 2 suspects, yet they were still uncertain about the true perpetrator. Speculations were rife, and even after Christine was set free, the village was split over her innocence. Beyond that, there were little more than theories to guide the investigation. Christine was officially exonerated of all charges on February 2, 1993, a full 8 years after the police had initially focused on her. However, her reputation had been irrevocably tarnished, an ordeal that felt like a life sentence, more so in a tight-knit community like La Panja, Cervelin, where even strangers mourned the loss of her son. Over the years, as technology advanced, the investigation was reopened and closed on multiple occasions, each time with mixed results. That's not to say there haven't been advancements, but they haven't led to any resolution, at least not yet. In 2001, the case went cold after DNA testing on a stamp from one of the Raven's letters yielded no results. 3 years later, in 2004, the Villemins received substantial monetary compensation for the personal harm caused by the mishandling of their son's case. Considering the fact that this couple had to mourn their child's death in the public eye while the murder remained unsolved and then found themselves behind bars, wrongfully in Christine's case, it was an overwhelming ordeal. This is particularly poignant given the fear they had to endure even before their 4-year-old was found lifeless in the Vallon River, a tragedy brought about by the elusive Raven. In 2008, the investigation into Gregory's case was revived at the behest of the Villemins. The investigative team carried out additional tests on Gregory's bindings and the letters left behind, but the results were inconclusive. In 2013, they decided to test Gregory's clothing and footwear. Given that Gregory's body was found in a river, the likelihood of finding any DNA evidence seemed slim, as the water would have likely washed away any traces left by the killer. However, the quest for answers kept the investigation alive, and the tests were carried out nonetheless. Sadly, the results didn't provide any new information. Fast forward to June 2017, and the case seemed to gain some heat with the introduction of a new automated software, Anacrim. This tool could leverage the analytical capabilities of computers to identify inconsistencies in a suspect's statements. Utilizing this technology, the police revisited the interviews conducted with Villemin's extended family. They found inconsistencies in the accounts of one particular couple, Marcel and Jacqueline Jacob, Gregory's great-aunt and uncle. The police also had concerns about Muriel Bull. They believed that she had more information than she was revealing and that her family had pressured her into silence. Despite Muriel's denials, one of her relatives suggested otherwise. Despite the suspicions and the questioning of Marcel, Jacqueline, and Muriel, all 3 were eventually released, leaving the case unresolved once again. In July 2017, following the announcement of the case's reopening, Jean-Michel Lambert, the judge who had been in charge of the original investigation, tragically took his own life. He wrote a farewell letter to the local newspaper, explaining that the pressure from the renewed investigation had become too much for him. Early on in the investigation, Judge Lambert faced criticism from his team for his lack of decisive action. For instance, after Muriel's incriminating statement about a child's murder, the judge instructed the police to take her home. However, there was no surety that she would follow their instructions not to contact her brother-in-law or discuss her statement. This left the police in a tricky situation, especially as Muriel was left in the care of her relatives, who could have potentially influenced her to change her story. Remember when her cousin's testimony started making the rounds? It's no stretch of the imagination to consider its implications. The leadership of the judge, let's just say it didn't exactly win him a lot of fans among the investigators. He wasn't exactly a poster child for the French justice system at its best. But hey, their hands were pretty much tied. Throw in the spur-of-the-moment press conference after Bernard Laroche's arrest, where the judge candidly shared some of Muriel's comments with a crowd of reporters, all eager for the next big story. The result? A somewhat chaotic investigation. Even more disappointing was the judge's handling of potential evidence found near where Gregory was thought to have likely entered the water. An insulin syringe turned into the police sparked the idea that the killer might have given Gregory an overdose either to incapacitate or kill him. This could explain the strangely peaceful expression on the young boy's face in death. But before they could delve deeper into this theory, our detectives hit a familiar and rather annoying roadblock. Judge Lambert was taken off the case in 1987. Years later, as his errors were exposed, rekindling both public and official interest in the case, he decided to exit stage left rather than live under the harsh spotlight. Those flashbulbs might have seemed warm initially, but they can be deceptive. If you don't watch out, you can start to burn. A tough lesson for the judge to learn so late in life, not exactly the kind of thing you pick up in law school. Considering the cost of tuition, you'd think they'd have a course or at least a guest lecture on it. Despite his numerous blunders, it was evident that Gregory's murder continued to shadow the judge even after his role in the case ended. In fact, it trailed him all the way to his last breath. In 2018, Muriel wrote a book about her involvement in the case. In her book, Breaking the Silence, she persisted in defending Bernard's innocence as well as her own and once again accused the police of coercing an incriminating statement from her. In her writing, she boldly stated that the cousin who insisted Muriel had been coerced into retracting her statement was blatantly lying. As you might expect, the cousin didn't receive this claim very well. Subsequently, he lodged a complaint, resulting in Muriel being charged with aggravated defamation in 2019. In the end, it's one of those convoluted he said, she said situations, with the full truth likely to remain elusive. Meanwhile, the identity of little Gregory's killer remains a mystery. Was it Bernard Laroche, the bitter cousin who seemingly had more warning signs than China has flags? And if his crime was a collaborative act, who were his accomplices? Did the great-aunt and uncle have a hand in it, as the police eventually speculated? Or is there still an unseen culprit hiding in plain sight? For Jean-Marie and Christine Villemin, the lingering questions are just a portion of the heartbreaking legacy left by Gregory's untimely departure. The torment of knowing that their baby fell victim to a ruthless individual with a lethal vendetta is a type of pain that most parents can only dread in their worst nightmares. Tragically, this became a persistent reality for the young couple. For them, Gregory's murder represented a double tragedy. Nevertheless, technology has come a long way in a relatively short period of time. With a bit of luck, they might still uncover the truth about their son's fate within their lifetimes. Let's just cross our fingers, it won't take another 3 decades to reach that point.